Hello there, my very good friends. Andy Murray here for What Culture Wrestling, and booking Keith Lee should be the easiest thing in the world for any wrestling promoter, even Vince McMahon. So why then should we be even the least bit worried about his main roster run? Let's break it down. To begin, we'll acknowledge just how brilliant Keith Lee really is. This guy's a five-tool player, a wonderful all-rounder. There's not a thing he can't do. I think he's great at pretty much everything in pro wrestling, and you know, we use the phrase athletic big man quite a lot these days, to the point that it's almost become cliche, but let's be honest, there are a lot of athletic big men in wrestling these days. But I think even if you compare them, Keith Lee comes out on top. I mean, take a guy like Dominik Slapjakovic. He is a tremendous wrestler, there's no doubt about that, but he's not as good at cutting promos. He doesn't play the same level of character, and on top of this, he doesn't project the same superstar aura as Keith Lee. And yes, I know Slapjack is Shane Thorne, shut up about it, but one guy who does project a superstar aura and who is brilliant is Damian Priest, the NXT North American Champion. But he's not quite as smooth or diverse as Keith is between the ropes, and on top of this, his match layouts are just a little bit less dramatic. There's a guy like Braun Strowman who is demonstrably less explosive than he was a few years ago, and over in AEW you've got Lance Archer, you've got Luchasaurus. Well, Luchasaurus is considerably slower, I think it's safe to say, than Keith Lee, and he comes with a gimmick that has a clear mid-card ceiling, and I am terrified of Lance Archer, but he's not quite as smooth as Keith Lee either. When you take these guys, all of whom I think are great by the way, but when you take them and when you compare them to Keith Lee, I think the limitless one stands tall. So in Keith Lee, you have a unique, marketable, versatile, hyper-athletic, charismatic, tremendous all-round pro wrestler who projects a superstar aura and is very easy to latch onto. So why then is his main roster run already stuttering? We're going to dive into that, but before I do, I'm not saying he's buried, I'm not saying he's ruined. Don't jump to extremes, the internet, because I know you love to do that. Everybody wants to talk about Keith Lee's change in presentation since he moved from NXT to Raw, but nobody wants to talk about the reasons behind this. Obviously, we've got the entrance music, but that's something that isn't relevant to today's discussion. I mean, that's something that Keith Lee agreed to, if you believe reports. He was given the choice and he said yes. So we're going to disregard that side of his change in presentation and talk instead about his ring attire. This might not seem like the biggest deal in the world at a surface level, but it was an immediate red flag because Vince McMahon created a problem, he solved a problem that didn't really exist. One of the most impressive things about Keith Lee, and there are many impressive things about Keith Lee, is that he's this giant brick of a man who can perform these ridiculous feats between the ropes. So why then did Vince McMahon have him come out for his first Raw match against Randy Orton wearing what looked like a wrestling baby grow? He had his torso covered for the very first time, maybe in his whole career, and he was wearing those weird loose-fitting shorts. The problem with the change in attire is that Keith Lee looked much more imposing before. Why did you need to slap him in a rash guard? Now, it has been reconfigured somewhat. He's now sporting a singlet, which does look a little bit better. But why on earth, Vince McMahon, a supposed master of booking big men in pro wrestling, why would he undermine a man's physical presence? Doesn't make any goddamn sense. And you know, we're a long time removed from like the way you look being the be-all or end-all with regards to a main event push in professional wrestling, but wrestling is still an aesthetics-driven business, and Keith Lee looked a lot better before than he does now. You're kind of making him look like a bit of a wrestling cartoon character at the moment, and that just doesn't make sense, man. But there have been some inconsistencies in Keith Lee's booking as well. First, however, we'll talk about the good stuff. So, he comes to the main roster and he's immediately rubbing shoulders with Drew McIntyre and Randy Orton, who were in the middle of an acclaimed title feud. Now, there aren't many NXT newcomers or call-ups or whatever you want to call them who get an opportunity like this. It's very rare to immediately be thrown in there with two of the most credible guys, the two top guys on the brand. But Keith Lee got that, and that shows that WWE are at least well-intentioned with this. They want to do something good with him. It's just the signs show us that maybe they don't know how to do something good with him. Something else that was really awesome was beating Randy Orton at Payback, right? They just put him over clean. A 13-time world champion lost to this dude in under 7 minutes. That was a great, great step and a vital one in making a new star, something the company has systematically failed to do for a long time. And at the time of recording, Keith Lee has 8 main roster matches to his name. 6 of them so far have involved Randy Orton or Drew McIntyre. The other one was against another former world champion in Dolph Ziggler, and he just beat Andrade in 3 minutes. All of these are good signs. Net positive run as a whole, I would argue, in fact. But there are a few bad signs as well, and we need to stop ignoring them. Defeating Randy Orton in 6 minutes 40 on pay-per-view is booking with balls. Going to a DQ or a countout, however, in 4 of your 8 main roster matches, most certainly is not. Apart from Payback, every single main roster match that Keith Lee has had one-on-one with Orton or McIntyre has gone to a screwy finish, and a common counter-argument to that is, well, they don't want anyone to truly lose, no one can afford to lose. But if that's the case, why would you book the match in the first place? Finishes like this are a company-wide problem, of course, and they only serve to tire out an already jaded audience, particularly if you're old as hell like me and you remember when pro wrestling wasn't like this all the time. They rile people up, they put heat on the announcers rather than doing anything for the performers who it actually detracts from. When such and such has a non-finish or a distraction or a DQ or whatever, the focus is on complaining about it. Nothing to do with the performers. And that's why these things suck. We're all tired of them. A ballsier booking team would have followed up on Keith Lee's win over Randy Orton. They would have maybe thrown him into the world title feud as a third party. That would have made him a co-protagonist in that story, not just some weird secondary piece. They didn't do that, however, and now it increasingly feels like they're asleep at the wheel when it comes to his push. 2 O's. Another red flag came out with WWE. It was on the 22nd of September, a report from the Wrestling Observer stating that WWE wanted to keep presenting Keith Lee as a top star, but they didn't have any specific plans for him after that. Beyond that, my apologies. Why is this a problem then? It's because it suggests that they don't really know how to book him like a top star. If they had a concrete plan, if they had a clear roadwork, a blueprint to follow, we're going to feud you with this guy and then we'll move you up to this and then we'll do this over here, that would breed confidence. Just going, yeah, we'll just book him like a star, innit? It's way too vague, it's all over the place. What does that even mean? It seems from the way things are panning out on television that they don't know the answer either. It's too unassertive a thing to yield positive results, and I don't want to harp on about the lack of long-term planning and storytelling in WWE, but it's there, it's right there, and it's a relevant point. This is the company of goldfish booking. They go from moment to moment, hoping to elicit little pops here and there, hoping that you, the viewer, will forgive or forget about any leaps in logic. Now, there are exceptions to this. Bayley versus Sasha, certainly a very good example of long-term planning and booking done well, but it doesn't apply for the most part. And that makes you feel even more worried about what they might do with Keith Lee going forward if they don't have a specific plan. The main worry with a guy like Keith Lee, or anyone coming up from NXT or debuting on WWE programming, is that they will eventually get lost in this massive, colossal mid-card that they have. The mid-card in WWE, unless you're a member of the select few, Drew McIntyre is someone who has certainly broken out of it in recent years, but for most people, for most men and women in this company, it's kind of inescapable. Once you're there, you are part of the grinding 50-50 machine. Anything that was unique or special is kind of taken away from you. You have these silly TV matches that end with these dumb finishes. You have your aura stripped away. I mean, hey, look at a guy like Shinsuke Nakamura. How special did that dude feel down in NXT? He's still very good. Don't get me wrong, still very good. But he's not special anymore. And the worry is that that might happen to Keith Lee should things keep trending in the direction they currently are. Again, I'm not saying that Keith Lee has been buried. I'm not saying that WWE is ruining him. I'm just saying that there are some concerns that we need to stop ignoring. Let's have a conversation. Let's broach these. Let's break it down. In fact, if we put this into context, if we look at other introductory runs on the main roster, I think this is probably one of the better ones, to be honest. Keith Lee's doing all right. I mean, he just squashed Andrade in 3 minutes on Raw. Andrade was United States champion. That's really good stuff. But we can't ignore the WWE star-making machine and its many, many faults. Now, we might be sitting here a couple of years from now looking at Keith Lee, the WWE champion or the Universal champion. He might be flying high. He might be in the position that Drew McIntyre is right now. In fact, say he moves to SmackDown in the upcoming draft. Alright, you might hotshot that process. Imagine how good him versus Roman Reigns would be. And I think that he got over so well in NXT, which is quite a lot like the main roster these days, if we're being honest with ourselves, is a good sign as well. He weathered any flaws in that booking process and became a star. That makes me very hopeful indeed that he can do it on the main roster. And you know, the entrance music might be changed. It sucks, but it might be changed. We'll get used to the new attire. If we don't get new attire, we'll get used to the current attire, and maybe he will find a way to World Championship glory in just a few years. But the initial signs of this main roster run aren't wholly positive, and we should keep that in mind when we're looking at the guy the next time he comes out on Raw. I hope he becomes a star. I hope he becomes a world champion. Let's not ignore those problems. Anyway, thank you for joining us today, guys. That was my take on the matter. I would love to hear yours as usual. Go ahead and drop that down in the comments section below. After that, you can follow us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. I've done this the wrong way around. You can like, you can share, you can subscribe, you can ring the bell for notifications. Then you can find me on Twitter at Andy H. Murray, where you can tell me really how wrong I am. Goodbye.